what's going on. This is how archaeology works. It's a process, not a final answer. It's crucial to understand that, you guys. It really is. When people come and say, oh, archaeology has proven the Book of Mormon false, you can rest assured they don't have a clue about how archaeology works. That's not the mindset of the archaeologists. They deal in plausibilities, possibilities, and missing physical evidence, even though it's in the texts, such as in our Book of Mormon. There are a lot of historical situations that could account for the reason why we don't find archaeological remains. But that doesn't mean they didn't exist. That means we can't find them. That's all that shows. This is important to understand. So anyway, John Sorensen. And now he's getting into, I'm going to show you that I can't read Spanish worth a spit. George R. Acosta. Las Toltecas. En los señores y estados militaristas. That's as good as I can get. This is a 1976 source. I'm not going to bother reading the Spanish sources. I'll just tell you when there's another source. Page 158. The total absence of metals from Tula during the Tula-Toltec period is inexplicable, since this was already in the full epoch of use of gold, silver, and copper. They had every metal there that the Book of Mormon mentions they had. But we can't find it. He doesn't know why, but we know they had it. He says, this presents a mystery which up to now has not been explained. Was the use of metal later, or have archaeologists not had any luck to find it? The only two objects of copper which have been found at Tula belong unquestionably to the Aztec region, or the Aztec horizon. But we can't find it. But he doesn't say that's proof they didn't have it. He doesn't deal in that state. You see what I mean? Now, another source on page 24. This is on page 9 of Sorensen. When you get this text, you can see I'm quoting the sources. Okay? Now, get this. Page 24 of Un complejo cerámico tipo Olmeca de preclásico temprano en el Mirador Cayapas. Now, I'm proving I am a dolt when it comes to reading Spanish, okay? Anyway, I just want you to know it's a 1973 source. He says on page 24, enormous quantities of iron ore fragments, lightly magnetic, perhaps ilmenite, in more or less cubical form, have been found at El Mirador and nearby. Some had holes drilled in 4 sides. Notice he says enormous quantities. They say there's no metal that the Book of Mormon could possibly have had. That's not true. For the Incas, oh, and this is another source. This is on page 10 of Sorensen. Don't want you to think I'm being too sloppy or misusing my source now. I've seen that being spread around on the internet. Page 307 through 312. For the Incas, copper was the most common metal. It says later on, bronze, on page 316 of this source, bronze was invented in Bolivia. It did not reach Ecuador or Colombia, but was a minor feature in Panama. Page 317, Tumbaga was on the coasts of Ecuador and Peru before the Christian era. Page 319, he says, among the Incas there was a word for iron, quele, Quellay. I don't know how to pronounce that. Quellay. This present hemispheric distribution maps and regional sequences for the use of each metal. They show the idea of gold in non-Mayan Mexico, silver, copper, platinum, bronze, platinum in Ecuador from 300 or perhaps 500 BC. There's some lead in Ecuador, so on and so forth. He's reviewing the various metals and where they're found and when. They're there. The point is, they are there, according to the archaeology. And then the classic Cumbayan Columbia metallurgy is set at AD 400 to 700. This is another source. I'm on page 11 of Sorensen. Yet another source, Carlos Balser, Metal and Jade in Lower Central America. This is in the Actus e Memorias for the International of American Congress. Gold working was introduced in Panama from Colombia around AD 250. But the techniques of metalworking were probably influenced by trans-Pacific contacts. Makes comparisons of jade and metalworking with China. Well, that's interesting. Transoceanic crossings, according to this scholar. Robert Barlow says, according to an early West Mexican-Spanish relation, tradition held that culture heroes Cunamote, the ancestors of the Huinamotecs, and Seturit, the ancestor of the Nairis or Cora, taught their people to make fire and gave them also machetes or cutlasses of iron. It's on page 11 of Sorensen. One then on page 12. Of copper they had two sorts. One hard, which they would use instead of iron, and the other flexible. They dug tin from the mines of Tlachco and lead from the mines of Izmiquilpan in the country of the Otomis. Of tin they made money, and they sold lead in the market. In Nicaragua, according to Cogludo, holy cow, copper bells and rattles, red shells on strings, precious stones, and copper hatchets served as money. They had copper hatchets. Thomas Bent, in the Tucson Artifacts, says over 24 artifacts, crosses, swords, spearheads, nearly all made of lead, were found between 1924 and 1928. Page 13 of Sorensen's material. Certain large, and this is another source, cultural patterning as revealed by a study of pre-Columbian axe and adze hafting in the Old and the New Worlds. This is in the book In Man Across the Sea, Problems of Pre-Columbian Contacts. It says on page, this is Daniel Randall Byrne. It says on page 173, it says, certain large axes of Ecuador of stone appear to be close copies of some metal forms known only in Egypt and the Near East. Whoa! That's interesting, isn't it? Also, he refers to the striking similarities between the polished stone axes of the Antilles and the Bronze Age metal axes of England. A. Houghton Blackiston, recent discoveries in Honduras. This is in the American Anthropologist. He says, page 539, over 800 bells in total, in addition to pieces of native copper from 3 to 7 inches long from which the bells were fashioned, have been found. He says there were also a number of copper spear points, one 10 inches long, attached to a portion of a shaft, now petrified. In other words, this is an old weapon. Anyway, he goes, oh, this is a good story. I got to get to this. This is what I've been working to get to. Criminy. Oh, well, and here's another one. And it's in Spanish. I'm not even going to read it to you. It's on page 14 of Sorensen's text. He says, Armenoid physical traits intruded in Peru about 500 BC, arriving with the first gold and copper work, carried by Dongson culture barriers from Southeast Asia, ultimately from the Pontic Steppes. So we know Southeast Asians were getting over here at least as early as 500 BC. Now, Bray Warwick. Ancient American metalsmiths. This is the culture lecture in 1971 of the Royal Anthropological Institute Proceedings for 1971. He says, page 28. This is on page 14 of Sorensen. There is a remarkable similarity between these described Peruvian tools and the set of Cushion stones found in bell beaker graves and associated with the earliest copper metallurgy in northern Europe. Page 32. The archaeological discoveries reflect inadequately the actual situation. Again, another scholar saying the archaeology doesn't give us the accurate picture.